Hello everybody and welcome to our first lecture for Music 103, American Popular Music. I will be going through chapters 1 and 2 in this unit. Start out at the very beginning. This is our first video, so we're at the beginning of chapter 1. And just so you know, all of these videos will be in a 15-minute format, so you can take them in small doses. So let's get started right away. The first thing the book really talks about is basically what is popular music, and that is actually your first discussion question. It's giving me some examples and some ideas of what popular music means to you. The book gives a definition as music that is mass-produced and disseminated via mass media. So basically what that means is that it is intended for use by a large number of people. In our case, we would be Americans, and of course, all over the world as well. But it is generally drawn from a variety of pre-existing musical traditions. Now, considering that I actually mostly teach classical music, some of these pre-existing musical traditions might be something from my stream of influence, would be the European American stream of influence, but we're going to be talking about the African American stream of influence and the Latin American stream of influence. So this music, what we consider our popular music today, is actually drawn from a large variety of places and people. And we'll see too that even our first wholly American music comes from many different sources. But before we get there, let's talk about some listening skills. In the book, it mentions 3 different processes for critical listening. One is to consciously seek out meaning in music. In other words, figuring out how it's all put together. What's its form? What's its development? And did it have any sort of cultural significance? We will learn right away that especially most of our early music from America has a huge cultural significance. We'll be talking about that in particular with the minstrel show coming up in chapter 2. A formal analysis is listening for the actual structure of the music. What are its parts? If we realize through consciously seeking out meaning that there are different parts of the music, then what is that actual structure of the music? What form would it be in, and what are its parts? So you're actually breaking down the musical structure of the piece. For a musical process, for its interpretation, there are all sorts of different types of techniques that a performer or composer might employ to draw in the listener, to repeat a pattern for musical momentum, or to give it some swinging rhythms, which is what you see here in the middle of the page. We have something called this musical process, and that's what I'm going to be showing you first. We have 3 different terms. We have something called a riff, a hook, and a groove. So this riff, this first one, is a repeated pattern for musical momentum. And let's take a look at that real quick. And honestly, how can I talk about a riff without talking about this amazing icon, James Brown? He begins this particular song, I Feel Good, with a riff. As soon as you hear it, you're going to recognize it. It's become sort of a part of our culture almost. As he gives his opening line, this is what we would consider to be a riff. I feel good. I knew that I wouldn't. I feel good. I knew that I wouldn't. So good, so good. I got you. Wow, I feel nice. So we've got this vocalization, this ow, and of course I feel silly saying anything because I can't do it like James Brown can do it, but these little vocalizations he makes are really considered to be riffs because they are a memorable musical idea. Anyway, a memorable musical idea that is a repeated pattern that brings us musical momentum. So he repeats this little ow idea throughout the entire piece of music or song, as you'll hear me call it a piece of music being a classical musician, but in the song. And it almost does become a hook, but we'll see that a hook is actually more of a phrase whereas this riff might be a little repeated pattern. So we have the ow, I feel good, da da na 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 na, and that whole little section there would be what would be considered to be a riff. Now a hook is a more of a phrase type of structure that we're going to be listening to next. And I did not choose Happy Days. I actually chose The Village People because this is such a memorable song. We can go from the very beginning here and it's immediately recognizable, immediately something that you hum. You may or may not be happy that it's stuck in your head, but it's definitely one of those pieces of music or songs that sticks with you, and that's what we call a hook. Okay, so basically they take the same phrase and they repeat it 3 times, each time at a higher note level. So it gets higher each time they do it, and it's done 3 times in a row, so it's immediately recognizable. And now they're going to do it again. Second time. Yep. Third time, young man. Okay, and then they're going to stay at the YMCA, right? So there is your hook, that memorable musical phrase that sticks with you, and we're actually going to learn about the composer who came up with that idea to begin with, but it's been used since the 1850s. Now finally, we have this last little one here called the groove, and this is a swinging rhythm. And I chose Stevie Wonder. There is this awesome video of him. He's actually, I've got to find it here. I found it. Here it is. He is actually on Sesame Street from the 1970s, which I love. They are totally grooving it here. It's so amazing. But at the very beginning, we have this repeated musical pattern. Again, the same general idea as a riff, but this becomes more of a distinguishable rhythmical pattern. You're going to hear on something called the clavinet, which is kind of a weird instrument from the 1960s and 70s before synthesizers became really mainstream. So you're going to hear this phrase, I'm going to point it out to you, that's being played on the clavinet. Right here. 4, 3, 2, 1. And it's repeated again. Right there. And repeated throughout. It's that repeated pattern. It's called a groove. Very superstitious. Writing on the wall. Very superstitious. I love that. He is jamming out. Let us rock the ball. Put your hand on, baby. So we get the idea of the groove here because we have this underlying pattern that repeats itself over and over again, and it's creating momentum and interest in the music, and that's something we call a groove. So the other kind of musical term that I want to talk about is something called a timbre, T-I-M-B-R-E. And this is a distinctive tone color of someone's voice or an instrument. Every single person has his or her own sound print. Our voices are all recognizable because they are all different. Same thing with an instrument. Every single instrumentalist sounds different from each other. Especially when you get into people that play, say, wind or string instruments that are not electric. Those are a little more identifiable sometimes. But even the electric instruments, every single person has his own identity or his own sound print. And that's what we call a timbre or a musical tone color. So the person that I chose to give us this example for is one of my favorite people in the world, and that's Louis Armstrong. We'll be talking a lot more about him. But his voice is so distinguishable. Let's take a listen to his voice here very quickly.
Here's one of our late records we like to play for you now, folks. And it's a beautiful number called What a Wonderful World. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them blue for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
So this clip is actually from Good Morning Vietnam, but we get such a clear, distinctive vocal line from him. Once you hear his voice once, it's instantly recognizable. And that's a musical tone color that we call timbre, T-I-M-B-R-E. So the book goes on to talk about the identity of music, and of course this is extremely important. I'm going to go to this bullet point here. Why do we like music as a culture? It's really an identifying factor in so many ways. For me, a lot, it is the narrative of our memories. There is a lot of songs you'll hear that remind you of something in your own life, or maybe the performer is giving you a story through a ballad or another type of song that you identify with. There is some types of music that might be considered an authentication of your particular ethnicity. That would be kind of like a subculture idea. Gender identity through a masculine song versus a feminine song, and the idea of comfort. Definitely enjoying music that we would identify with. That's one of the things that we talk about a lot in classical music, is how you identify with the music. And something that we like to discuss in class is there a level of comfort here, or is it something that you completely disengage from? And we will, of course, talk about that in this class as well. So the enjoyment factor of music is very important to us as human beings. The other thing the book talks about is something called stereotyping, and these are just some general stereotypes that you might see within musical culture. Mostly we're talking about popular music here from, say, the I guess the minstrel shows like that too. So really from about 1850 onwards, from where we actually begin talking about music. Music and technology. Here the book says music technology has created a gap between artist and audience. In other words, in order to feel really connected to this person, do you need to be in the audience, or have you created a connection simply through listening through the music? Live performance, because so many of these venues are so large, really doesn't take on that same significance as you would in, say, an opera that would have been enjoyed by a royal court in 1750. That's these people are right up with their musicians, kind of in their face. Whereas here, there's a barrier between the performer and the listener. Within the recording industry, there are some important entities. Here, I'm just going to run through these very quickly. We have the composer. You'll be hearing me talk quite a bit about a composer as a writer of music. And this particular class, besides composer, we often call them, obviously, a songwriter. So a lyricist is the person that writes the words to the song. The composer oftentimes is the person that writes the musical portion of the song. An arranger is someone that I actually work with a lot. I play the French horn, and you don't really hear a lot of, French horns in popular music. So if there's a larger orchestral arrangement, we have an arranger who comes in and writes all the music for all the different parts of an existing song. A&R is a talent seeker, artists and personnel. They're always out there looking for new talent. Of course, we see that in music quite often, as well as, like sports. That would be another place where they're always out seeking talent. So these artists and personnel people are always looking for new and fresh faces. A producer would be the producer and the engineers are those guys that are in the booth that are helping develop a sound and a type of sound or a type of recording, and then of course the quality of the album. And finally, some important centers of music productions. Of course, LA, out here where we live, New York, and Nashville would be the three main centers of musical production. And we will be moving into streams of influence in the next video.